It's about what design makes possible, how you can use design to make life more pleasant, make it easier. That's what has always driven me, I think. I would also say that I think that the design process is very useful because it's about analysing the need. What is the human need that you're actually designing for? Then it's research, looking at all the possible ways that other people have solved a similar problem. And then it's about really trying to do the best you can to create a design that is both very functional, very practical, and that's where it differs from art, of course, but also beautiful. And I think that good design has to be both. It can't be just one or the other. It's inevitably a very social process as well. Grant and I came together in the mid-60s. We formed a design partnership, but also a life partnership. It was the beginning of that really exciting time when there was such social ferment. Anything seemed possible. People were exploring new ways of living, new ways of designing. Manufacturing was a huge part of our GDP at that point. And it's hard to believe that now because it is so different. You know, we've lost automotive industry. A lot of things that we did would no longer be possible. I first met Grant at Aristoc, which at that time was an extraordinary business, creating hundreds and thousands of metal tube frame furniture items. And Grant had been a consultant to them for some years, and together they'd built up this very successful enterprise. As a student, I was enormously impressed by the factory, but I was also very impressed with Grant because he had such a responsible attitude to design and such a holistic view of what design could and should be. As a result of that, I asked him if I could work with him. So I was there for, I suppose, 2 or 3 years. You've got to remember, I was 20 years younger. I mean, how fortunate could you be to be in partnership with a really great designer, but also be exposed to people like Robin? Working at Aristoc was very interesting because a lot of the time was spent in the factory. Quite frequently, one would be going down to the upholstery section to talk to the upholsterers about a better way of doing things, or looking at the welding section. It was very immediate contact with that manufacturing process and the people, and getting to know how they approach the work should be recognised as a truly collaborative effort. I learned a lot. Well, I particularly learned a lot about Grant and his approach to design. Grant used to talk about that process as having a conversation with yourself. He was so gifted, not only as a form giver and as an analyser of the need, in the need to have a good design brief. You've got to really understand the human situation before you do anything. So we were both consulting there and doing these other projects at the same time. Got Expo here, the STEM chair, and Numero. 3 different furniture plastic projects and 3 different processes. With Expo, we're talking about expanded polystyrene. With STEM, we're talking about rotationally cast high-density polyethylene. And with the Numero, we're talking about moulded resilient polyurethane foam. And during the 60s and 70s was a time when a lot of European designers, particularly, and of course the Eames in America, but a lot of people were doing marvellous things with plastics and of course getting very excited because it was such a new realm, new possibilities.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Australia. At Expo 67, it has been something of an inspiration.
The talking chair was the first project that Grant and I worked on in our new partnership. And Robin Boyd commissioned Grant in 1966 to create a chair for the Australian Pavilion in the World Expo in Montreal, Canada.
I do want to say how greatly my own country has appreciated the opportunity of being represented at Expo.
Because people get so tired in those enormous world fairs, he suggested that he would create a comfortable sort of salon environment, and he wanted Grant to design a wing chair, and that the messages about Australia would be communicated through speakers in the headrest. So the challenge then was to design a shape that would both hold the human figure, the sitter, comfortably, but also relate to the enormous volume of the exhibition building. The audio side alone was cutting edge at the time and involved a lot of research and experimentation, so that as the sitter sat down, you triggered the sound into the headrest. The shell itself was another really challenging piece of technology because it was a large form. They had to be shipped from Melbourne to Canada, and they had to get there before the ports froze over. But we had been working with Danish Deluxe, and they had just got the license for a new technique called place meuble, which involved introducing styrene pellets into an aluminium mould, and then introducing steam, which would expand the beads and form a shell. And Grant was particularly excited because he wanted to create curvilinear shapes suitable for supporting the human body. But also with plastics moulding, it means that you can put the material just where it's needed. So it was a good use of material. We then built a full-size prototype made out of styrene itself, glued together, so that we produced a full-size prototype. Aristoc won the contract to upholster them, and Danish Deluxe moulded the styrene form. They went off to Montreal, and they were enormously successful because it was a brilliant design idea of Robert's, that people were actually comfortable. It was so different to all the other pavilions. It was a great talking point and a huge success. We didn't actually get there because we were too busy on the next job. Well, stem chair, which was late 60s, we were always looking for potential plastics, materials and techniques that could be used in furniture. When we came across rotational casting, it was then being used just for big crates and things. So you could see the large scale of these products that had the potential for furniture. We talked with ACI, and they were very interested. At that time, because there was such a strong manufacturing base, you could approach them with a wacky idea. They grasped it straight away. Wow, what an interesting challenge. So the stem chair was then designed for that process, which meant it was a hollow shell, different to an injection moulded shell, but with a fairly even thickness. So the form is a bit like an egg or a tulip shape with a central column, and the idea was that it would be linked to a injection moulded base with a steel column so that it could turn. So it then became a sort of active chair as well. And it's been described as being full of optimism and joy. It was really expressed the zeitgeist of those times, I suppose. It was Carnaby Road and mod. It was colourful, lively, and experimental. Numero, I reckon, was probably the most interesting, exciting and successful project that Grant and I did together. And it was really the last furniture project that we did. And it came about because we discovered that a little crowd in Dandenong called South Australian Rubber Mills had just conquered this new technology for moulding resilient polyurethane foam. At that point it was called hot cure, and they were using it to create seating for the automotive industry. So they were relatively small pieces. But we also heard that they were exploring cold cure, which was an easier technology, and you could do bigger things with it. So we experimented, and Oboe, the ball chair, was the first project. And we were sitting talking one day over the desk, and suddenly this idea just came into Grant's head. You know, it was just a fully formed idea of a hollow sphere with polystyrene beads. So he then made a prototype out of flat sheet foam, and it worked. And so he took it off to Uniroyal, was the company that this Dandenong plant was supplying. So it was a question of inspiring them to then get involved in furniture. They were as simple as they could be. It was just basically two components: the moulding, that foam that just comes out of the mould fully formed as a unit, and then you pull on a two-way stretch cover, and that's it, you've got a chair. And there were 3 units that could be readily rearranged to whatever you wanted. One of the real technical challenges on that one was the development of two-way stretch material, because the moulding was very flexible and it needed a two-way stretch cover. If you used non-stretch, the seams burst. It was really functional, very successful, suited all sorts of environments, lifestyles. Would be good for small flats now. Australia was a very small market and very widespread, you know, so to get any product from Melbourne or Adelaide to wherever was just a big factor in the cost. So we looked longingly at the markets of Europe or America, whereas now today we would look at Asia, where you had a much bigger market. I think that one of the most exciting aspects of design, maybe one of the most imponderable, is the ability to envisage something. I can see in my head something that doesn't exist. I think that's something I'm only appreciating now. Maybe it's because we're such a visual culture that we place such emphasis on the look, the shape, but there's so much more. The connection to nature was just so fundamental to both Grant and myself, and it's one of the many things that overcame that 20-year age gap, that we both needed to be in nature, observing nature, photographing nature, looking really closely at nature and observing the forms and structures and being inspired by that. Nature is just so wonderfully complex and beautiful. Why do we do anything?